Dr. Richard, we are happy to have you speak to us this afternoon. Thank you for attending. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, my friend, Dr. Boba, for that introduction, and to all the listeners who are tuning in today and to get consortium. Thank you so much for your excellent work on very topical issue, and to Dr. Douglas for laying that foundation. Let me just share my screen. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to be able to discuss this very, very important topic. I always like to start off with an African proverb, which one is that rising up early makes the road short. And what this proverb tells us today is that the challenges that we are actually facing, if we are able to see beyond, as Dr. Douglas did present in his presentation, we can actually be able to make a lot of progress. And the data is very clear. When you look across the entire world, and more so in the African continent, emerging infections are increasing at 6.9% annually for the past 2 decades. And the data clear that emerging infections increasing at 6.9 annually for the past 2 decades are also in tandem with biodiversity loss, which Dr. Douglas did show very clearly, where up to 68% of global biodiversity has been lost since 1970, and Africa is not spared. Out of this, it has lost up to 65% of its biodiversity since the 1970s. And more importantly, when you look at all these challenges and put Africa in perspective, you will notice that 87 of the leading global food crops that we all depend on for our food, and 35% of global production volumes from crop, they depend on pollination. And when we start to destroy our biodiversity, one of the key aspects is that it also translates to our food systems, which result not only to lack of nutritious food, but at the same time, it cascades to the health aspect, which is quite very, very important. And so the quality and the quantity of what we eat, on average, as a result of biodiversity loss, is actually becoming a very big issue in the whole process. Not only health, not only biodiversity loss, but also of the entire food system that we talk about. And when you look at the aspect which relates to the pharmaceutical industry, nature is the world's original pharmacy that we know, and that as of today, over 50% currently approved drugs globally are directly or indirectly derived from natural products. The other aspect that is quite very, very important to understand in the conversation that we have today is that the loss of biological barrier against the spread of disease-causing microbes, the high microbial diversity provides, cannot be ignored. And when you put all of these things together, the science is unequivocally clear. Human activity today, as we speak, from the latest report that was released in 2021 by the United Nations Environment Programme and Food and Agricultural Organization, showed that we are already using the equivalence of 1.6 Earth to maintain our current way of life. And this is unsustainable. We cannot be able to continue along this pathway and actually hope that we can be able to address the challenges of diseases, emerging diseases for that matter, that we are seeing. And so across the entire continent, up to 65% productive land is degraded. This is costing the continent each and every year $65 billion US, in addition to the challenges that cascade because of this land degradation. Desertification is increasing, affecting up to 45% of land, and Africa, on their part, have seen also a jump in diseases. Dr. Douglas allude to this. Jump in diseases spread from animals to people in the last decade because of this unsustainable consumption that is resulting to degradation of environment, degradation of forests, degradation of land, and affecting the biodiversity habitat and allowing animals to become in contact with humans. This is quite very, very serious. And to put this in reality and perspective, it is very, very key that we start to look at, when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, the reality is when we're talking about zoonotics. We're talking about One Health. There is a very, very important aspect that is, to me today, worse than what we've ever seen when it comes to emerging diseases, and that antimicrobial resistance. It is estimated that by 2050, up to 10 million people across the globe will lose their life as a result of antimicrobial resistance. More importantly, when you look at sub-Saharan Africa, for that matter, which is currently today, as we speak, having the highest incidence of antimicrobial resistance, that globally at 24 per 100,000, most of these will be affected in future, will be up to about 4.1 million people projected to die annually from annual antimicrobial resistance in the next 27 years from today. And when you take Africa, and most of sub-Saharan Africa, with already the challenges of poverty, the challenges of food insecurity, we take the challenges of malaria, and we factor in this antimicrobial resistance, which is becoming a very big issue. It then means that already we are having challenges of unprecedented proportion, that this will only add to that already precarious equation and make the continent not achieve its sustainable development, and more so also continue to plunge people into suffering. Climate change, as Dr. Douglas did present in his presentation, is a big issue, causing increased temperatures that increase the multiplication rate. Microbes and increasing emissions aggravate 60% of all infections, resulting in increased antimicrobial usage. And this is a big issue because, as we're speaking today, the world is at 1.1 degrees. And that means that we're just 0.4 degrees shy of the 1.5 degrees that is supposed to be the safe level in which the world is supposed to be. The United Nations Emissions Gap Report showed that the pathway in which we are headed, the world is heading towards 2.7 degrees if we continue with the same policies and with the same implementation level, the nationally determined contributions as we're currently doing today. It means it will not only be high warming, different patterns of rainfall that will plunge people into suffering with flooding or droughts that we are already seeing in the Horn of Africa. It will be this big issue, antimicrobial resistance, that is already causing a lot of harm. But in the African continent today, the use of antibiotics without prescription is also high, with some slums areas, which we have a lot of them in the African continent, in cities. We are seeing up to about 90% of households having to use antibiotics without a prescription. And this is a common phenomenon that we're seeing across the continent today. And these antimicrobials end up circulating into the environment and contributing to damaging nature's delicate balance. But more importantly, what is happening is that when these antimicrobials circulate into the environment, they get eaten up by animals, they get eaten up by human beings, that then they only pave the way to making antimicrobials become more resistant when humans are infected by even alternative diseases. And these then become a big threat to the environment and to humans as well. And that is why working together with the Food and Agricultural Organization, with UNEP, and also World Health Organization, an international animal organization, to come up with One Health, because addressing the challenges, biodiversity also needs to be seen through health, but One Health from the perspective that we must bring in the environmental dimension, we must bring in the food dimension, we must ensure that at least we start to look at our biodiversity and most of animals. How do diseases transmitted from animals to humans? And we prevent them not only through the lens of ensuring that at least we can treat them, but making sure that we have that buffer, which is better protection of the environment, and at the same time ensuring that at least our biodiversity is intact. And so the core reason of all this is summed up in what is called a triple planetary crisis, which is caused by the unsustainable consumption. Unsustainable consumption by humans, as I said, we're consuming using 1.6 Earths already. And the core driver, biodiversity loss, as Dr. Douglas already showed, is unsustainable consumption. Production patterns, which are as a result of economic development that is unsustainable in the first place. And therefore, addressing this risk from an environmental lens requires a demonstration of alternative approaches that provide lucrative socioeconomic returns. Because at the end of the day, the cause of biodiversity loss is as a result of us humans encroaching to habitats, destroying biological species. Why? For economic reasons, for buildings, for farming, and for self-interest. And therefore, if we are able to dissuade people to still do things in a sustainable way, but for economic reasons, then we are going to take them off the pressure from destroying the very biological systems, biological diversity that is quite very, very instrumental, and in this way dissuade unsustainable economic drivers. And when you look across the entire world today, food systems key, because food systems are the primary drivers of biodiversity loss, as alluded earlier, with agricultural expansion alone, threatening up to 24,000 of the 28,000 species as a risk of extinction. Agricultural expansion accounts for up to 70% of the projected terrestrial biodiversity loss. That then means if we are to address biodiversity loss and keep antimicrobial resistance bay and ensure that at least we can also be able to drive transformational climate action solutions, we must be able to take food systems and make them the center pillar of solutions to either preventing biodiversity loss in the continent, driving socio-economic opportunities, and of course, building transformational climate action solutions. This then means when you look at these from the socio-economic lens, when it comes to the food systems, what we need to also understand is that a heavy chemicalized agriculture that sometimes is promoted for just economic gains for the short term doesn't make economic sense, doesn't make environmental sense, and in the long run, actually causes more harm than good. If you look in the entire African continent today, the biofertilizer market is projected to experience a compounded growth rate of 5.9% between now 2025, that's just about 2 years from now. This could be able to create income opportunities. And from empirical evidence, it is shown from the work that we've been doing that youth-driven enterprise actions, turning agricultural waste into biofertilizer, is a lucrative opportunity. And we're speaking in a continent today where over 60% of the population is youthful, but yet paradoxically, 60% of the very youthful population are unemployed. Where will the jobs come from in a way that sustainably protect our diversity, drive transformational solutions, but at the same time also provide alternatives? They will be in the environmental sector. They will be in the waste sector, because waste is wealth if we see it through the lens of providing alternative to the chemicalized fertilizer that countries are importing, especially in the continent today, depreciating their foreign reserves, whereas that could be an opportunity to invest more in turning waste to biofertilizer, in turning waste to be able to ensure that at least the biofertilizer actually start to replace chemicalized fertilizer. That will mean that we will not have chemicalized fertilizer leaching into our oceans, into our rivers, that people will drink dirty water, then fall sick, take antimicrobial, then get sick again, secrete the antimicrobial antibiotics, and then get eaten by bacteria to become more resistant, that will then get into humans again, cause more antimicrobial resistance. And so when we look at this from the perspective of opportunity, solutions that are very simple that can then address multiplicity of challenges, then we are on the right path. The other aspect is very simple. When we look at simple climate action solutions, like decentralizing simple solar dryers that young people can actually be able to develop, which through an initiative called innovative volunteerism that we're driving across the entire African continent, we are seeing young people come together to be able to retool their skills, to turn simple challenges of lack of post-harvest losses, post-harvest losses equipment, to start developing solar dryers that are helping mothers dry their vegetables. What does that do? It helps dehydrate vegetables, dehydrate their cassava to the requisite moisture content is as per the standards bureau's standards, to then be able to ensure that at least aflatoxin is actually kept at bay. And these simple actions are actually fighting against antimicrobial resistance, because then when you eat food that is spoiled, and have an infection in your stomach, of course, you're going to get antibiotics that will only become more resistant if you continue to eat that kind of food. But let's look at it from the perspective of degradation of the environment, where when a mother grows her food and it gets spoiled, because post-harvest losses are a big issue in the African continent today, costing the continent $48 billion US each and every year. When that food is grown and it gets wasted as a result of post-harvest losses, there is bound to be an interest in expanding more land to grow more. But as you expand more land and destroy biodiversity, you will end up still not having food because of post-harvest losses. And therefore, providing these solutions of climate action, solution of solar dryers that can be able to dehydrate food, to dry food, to preserve food, then we will actually be able to ensure that we enhance this preservation value addition and reduce these losses, which becomes now very, very important, because the continuous extension and expansion of agricultural land for production is a biggest risk driver of biodiversity loss. And the other aspect that we cannot ignore is the aspect that waste is seen as waste, but waste is wealth. And in the continent of Africa today, what we know is that less than 20% of waste is recycled. And a similar trend is observed, where the volume of waste is projected to triple in the next 27 years from today, and with recycling rates in the entire African continent just 4%. These are lost opportunities, because if we are able to get our young people and retool their skills to be able to turn waste to fuel briquettes that can be able to replace charcoal, that will be an employment opportunity. But at the same time, it will also be an opportunity where they can turn plastic waste into pavement tiles that can start to replace concrete. And what we've seen with young people across the continent, turning plastic to plastic tiles, to pavement tiles, turning plastic even to apparels and school bags, it's creating enterprising opportunities, but helping to address a huge environmental issue and a huge health issue. And when you take briquettes, for example, we have our mothers who are choking because of indoor pollution. And indoor pollution in the continent kills over 700,000 Africans each and every year. In a continent where we have over 930 million Africans using unclean cooking, putting fuel briquettes to be able to replace charcoal will not just be a socioeconomic opportunity, because you'll be replacing with fuel briquettes that can tap into 20 billion that is expended, 20 billion US dollar that is expended on charcoal each and every year. This is an economic opportunity that is both right for health, right for protecting our biodiversity, and right creating employment for our young people. And more importantly, we cannot be able to address this issue without focusing on ecotourism, because across the ecological footprint of the tourism sector is significant. It is estimated that out of the nearly 40 species of plants and animals included in the IUCN Red List, 13 species, 1,761 are reportedly threatened by tourism development. In addition, tourism is responsible for up to 8% of global emissions. And as more people travel each year, this footprint is escalating. So what do we need to do? We need to be able to focus on ecotourism. Tourism whereby it's not just about going to places and having a footprint that destroys biodiversity, but that is actually one in which when people travel and go to places, they can be able to plant trees. They can be able to be given bags that maybe have seeds, so that when they travel, they can be able to throw it. We saw an example in Uganda recently, where young people have come up and they're developing bags from waste, using waste material to develop barrel bags that are given to tourists with seeds that could actually be planted. And when they carry those bags and drop those bags as these see wild animals or get into forested areas to see different species, they drop those there and they are able to grow different trees. Those kind of practices are what needs to be followed. Because in Africa, nature tourism is reported to generate higher income than general tourism. And it generates 40% more full-time employment in agriculture and provide greater opportunities for women than other sectors. This is something that we should be able to embrace. And more importantly, what is happening is we cannot be able to ignore the aspect of climate change. Know that Dr. Glass did talk about this, and I'm just going to re-emphasize again on this aspect, because as we're speaking today, I did allude to this. The world is at 1.1 degree. But let me just emphasize this. The fact that we have a global temperature 1.1 degree today doesn't mean that Africa is at 1.1 degree. Africa is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. The reality with the latest scientific figures we have, the UNEP emissions gap report, the UNEP adaptation gap report, and other reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report released, shows Africa is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. Some regions are even warming at 2 degrees. When you take West Africa, you take Eastern and Southern Africa and Central African region, because of this fast warming than the rest of the world, if the world was to hit 1.5 degrees today, Africa be heading to temperatures almost 3 degrees to 3.5. Means hell on earth. Why do I mean by this? The drying up of rivers, the drought that we're seeing already today, affecting over 2 million people in the Horn of Africa. In the Sahel, people being displaced and plunged to suffering more than ever before, tells us that the globe warming will be catastrophic for biodiversity, will be catastrophic for humans. And over 10% of plants, vertebrates, and invertebrate species across 90% of vulnerable regions like Africa, they face risk of local extinction. This should usher us to action to pay 30% decline in marine fisheries in parts of Africa by 2050. Fishery that is not only responsible and provide protein to many, but at the same time create employment for millions of people, especially in coastal towns. This means that we need to be able to start looking at actions that are important. In the discussion today of just transition, yes, indoor pollution, which can be reduced by using biogas, which can be produced from waste, provides an alternative opportunity for the continent today. That how do we start to look at turning waste to biogas that can then be able to provide clean cooking to our mothers, where we have over 930 million Africans depending on clean cooking. And that should constitute the core of our just transition debate. How do we enhance investment in e-mobility, which is now taking up and shifting not only market shift, but also technological shift across the world. And an aspect that is not really always discussed, which I think should be brought to this debate now, is the critical minerals discussion that will be mined from the African continent. What will be the impact on our biodiversity? How will that translate to the health of citizens in the continent when animals start becoming in contact with humans, the result of the scramble for the critical minerals to produce e-mobility, e-buses, solar panels? What will be the benefit of that for the African continent today? And these are aspects that we cannot be able to relent on if we are to keep our biodiversity health intact and also ensure that we fight against infections. This is very, very crucial and very, very crucial for the entire African continent. Those actions that I've mentioned, protect biodiversity, cannot be discussed without putting in the equation what I mentioned here. Africa is a young continent, period. Any action, whether it is on health, it is on economy, it is on addressing poverty, without putting young people at the center of the equation, we will never get it right. And I've argued this many times. Africa is also an informal continent. And when we discuss solutions without looking at how the informality of the continent can be able to tap into this, with our youth included, we are just throwing water on the duck's back. And I would say this again, retooling our youth skills to be able to focus on solutions that protect our biodiversity, but at the same time put money in their pockets, put on the table, is the best arsenal and the best strategy to not only fight infections, but at the same time move a continent forward. Because the biggest resilience is socioeconomics. And when the mother is sick, when that son or daughter is sick, when there is no money to be able to take that kid to the hospital, when there is lack of nutritious food, to be able to keep mothers and children at bay from infectious diseases, the immune system to be compromised, then we are failing. And therefore, skills retooling towards building the much needed manpower to drive transitions in turning waste to fuel briquettes, in turning agricultural waste to biofertilizer, in turning waste into biogas. It's an opportunity in making sure that at least we can be able to apply nature-based solutions that can then not only ensure bumper harvest, but produce nutritious food. Those need skills. These can only be able to be done by our young people. And therefore, the best approach is to ensure that our young people become the provider of solutions, not the complainers in chief. An academic curriculum needs to become not just a policy dimension, but that solutions need to be integrated into school curriculum, not only at the university level, even down to the polytechnics in communities, so that a youth at every level in the community, level in the country, can actually become a solution provider, to be able to provide solutions that are sustainable and can be able to protect our biodiversity. The other aspect is that when you look at the realities of the discussions around this very critical issue of biodiversity, sometimes they're discussed in silo, but we need what is called policy harmonization. We need what is called policy coherence. That is why One Health will become important. The discussion today on biodiversity, though an environmental dimension, discussed within the health space, is important because One Health, bringing all hands together to ensure that environmental solutions addressing health issues, that food security solutions addressing health issues, that even economic solutions geared towards making sure that at least the center around health issue become important. That's why the policy being made in the Ministry of Agriculture, in the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Environment should align. And that coherence is what is missing in the African continent today. The biggest policy mismatch in the continent is the fact that excellent policies are meant to be in silo rather than to work in complementarity. And that is a big challenge. It duplicates efforts, and at the same time, it results to wastage of resources, which cost the continent, which cost lives, which cost our biodiversity. And therefore, moving forward, we must be able to know that a single bracelet cannot jingle. And so we must be able to unite, to think more in complementarity and in synergy rather than thinking in silos. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard, for that very, very informative presentation. It was a well-presented, well-done presentation, and I learned so much from your presentation. Very transdisciplinary, offering, identifying the challenges and offering emerging solutions to these challenges. And that is what is important, especially in Africa today. It's not just about discussing the issues, but it's about finding possible solutions to these issues, and solutions are practicable. African solutions to emerging African challenges. And that is what you've been able to do in the last few minutes. And thank you very much for that very detailed presentation. Just a recap of some of the things you said. It's so detailed that I'm sure our presenters will need to go through it one or twice again to have a very deep understanding of the transdisciplinary transdisciplinary approach you use to identify the challenges and identify solutions to those challenges, especially solutions that are youth-driven. Africa is a very young continent with potentials of youth, and if we don't maximize those potentials, it can become a very big challenge to us in the nearest future. And that is why any solution on the continent of Africa today must be youth-driven. The youths must set the pace for tomorrow, because they are not just the leaders for Africa for tomorrow in Africa, but they are the leaders of Africa of today. And the future of this continent depends solely on the youth of Africa. So maximizing the potential in the youth is a solution to emerging transdisciplinary and complex challenges